Hello, and welcome to the Great Debate, where we're going to debate the age-old question, agility versus control. The pace of change in our digital world puts pressure on organization to weigh what seems like conflicting priorities, innovation and governance. We're so excited to have Constellation Research here with us today to share their thoughts on how those two key topics come together.
Hi, I'm Ray Wang with Constellation Research. I'm going to be taking on the DevOps perspective, talking about speed and the need for agility and what's important out there.
And I am Andy Thorai. That's Thorai with an AI. Thorai with an AI. I'm a principal analyst with Constellation covering the AI ML technologies, specifically how they apply to IT ops. Today, I'm here with my man Ray to explore, discuss, and argue the good and bad ways the organization is doing the DevOps, and how ITSM can still provide guide rails going into the cloud. Let's go, Ray.
Yeah, let's jump in and enjoy. Keep us in check so we don't, go astray.
Looking forward to it.
So here's the deal, right? Andy, on the DevOps side, we are in a crisis, right? We can't get code out fast enough. We have massive pressures. Our revision and release cycles have increased, right? We've gone from once a week to once a day to sometimes multiple times a day. That type of pressure means that we have everything on our butts to get stuff out the door. And more importantly, we're competing with all these other companies that are doing the same thing. And so we feel a ton of pressure in terms of having to get release cycles much more quickly out there. And we've got to be much more responsive, much more agile. And every time you guys come up with another constraint, it slows us down and it drives us nuts. And we feel like all we're doing is just documentation for you guys. It's awful. So.
Are you kidding me? Are you done?
No.
What are you talking about? DevOps, we are talking about half the job. You're doing half the job. That'll do you create so much problems. Have you heard about reliability? Yes, you are producing code at the pace that, way more than what you used to do before. But what's the point? If you put the code out and if it breaks 20 other teams, what's going to happen? There's this thing called reliability. You need to have your services run reliably. Yes, you are doing 700 microservices, 400 changes into each of the services every day. That's fine. But in order for it to work, in order for people to use it, it has to work. It has to work. That's the problem. You need some control over that, not just, going and, waltzing around like a cowboy and producing code, man.
Well, hang on, guys.
Our guys are really
bring up
good.
Great points, right? Bring up great points. I'm going to steer you into different topics that are relevant to the people attending today. Okay. So let's talk about collaboration. How important is collaboration and the ability to work at the way you want to work? Talk to me about that from both sides.
Collaboration with whom, though? Is it collaboration with our ITSM guys or collaboration with our dev teams? Our dev teams work great with each other. We don't have any issues, right? We crank out stuff. We don't have to think about it, right? I mean, we've got rock star coders everywhere. I'm not even worried about them. It's whenever we interface with ITSM, that's where all the trouble starts.
Yeah, okay. So you have a rock star, but what's the point of having a rock star, singing solo, right? Again, going back to the original point, here's what had happened. The DevOps is actually supposed to be about dev and ops. You're supposed to dev it, and then you're supposed to ops it. But what you guys did is that split that ops into two, took the thing that'll help you with the code velocity, the release management, the code changes, and how do you make it faster to release it? You did that portion of it, half of it, and created a DevOps off of it. And then dev plus half ops produces code. You talk about creating problems. Let's see, with the code that you're putting out, what's going to happen if it is going down? Who's under pressure now? Both of us.
Let's talk about that when things go down, when the organization goes down. There's monitoring, there's observability. How does that play into your world?
Yeah, I mean, for our end, what we actually do is we have a team that actually puts the code out, and we make sure that, everything is okay before we release it. It's not that we don't do any quality. It's not that we don't do any checks. I mean, we do have our processes in place. We're trying to use as much low code, no code platforms where we can. So we have reusability in place, right? We take a mock approach. We look at microservices, API, cloud headless, and we put those things into play so that we have a lot of repeatability and reusability. So when we release something, it's not like we're throwing out brand new code that's out there. What we're doing is we're taking code that's been proven, and maybe like a good small percentage of it is stuff we haven't used before, something that's being extended or put out there. That may be, I mean, that's probably maybe the area where we actually have a little bit of creativity in terms of getting stuff out the door. Sometimes we got to patch things. Sometimes it's because the tools aren't available. We build that stuff so that it works.
Well, it's that small piece of code that, took down Cloudflare, which took down the entire internet for more than half a day. But what we are doing from the ITSM or SRE perspective, that if you want to, to keep them in check, in the newer modern cloud apps, the old way of monitoring, the runs and the synthetic monitorings and the APMs and, other monitoring doesn't exactly work. I mean, it works. It helps you to an extent.
It works.
It works, but again, if I have, let's say, for example, if I have 10 microservices, if one of them goes down, your APM is going to tell you that your application went down, not necessarily which microservice went down. So we need more than APM. We need things like distributed tracing. You need service ownership. We need service tracing. So we're working on ways that, we could do more with a newer set of tools. So we could pinpoint and tell you which of you guys are breaking. Which you seem to be all the time.
It doesn't break that much. We're basically using, if you think about our production environments, we run enough regression testing in there to be okay. We've got enough, unless we're in a Gitless environment, which happens in some cases, right, where we have to take everything else down. We're following basic DevOps processes, right? And these processes help you. These processes have been put into place so that we can actually get to the speed. I still don't understand what we're doing. Where are we breaking? Where do we break on your end? So
you're breaking everything.
Andy, I'm going to come to you first for the next topic, though, because I'm hearing great things from both sides, but I also want to know, what about the baseline? Knowing what you have, right? How do you know what you have so that you can add to it? Some people talk about a CMDB. What's your thoughts about that?
So let me take the question first. So the CMDB. I have my own thoughts on it. Being an ITSM guy, it barely worked for the original ITSM and asset management and doesn't cut it for the cloud. So we need a new way to track things, the service ownerships, the service tracing, service reliability. There are other tools that are coming up and available, newer tools, a combination of the newer tools, not necessarily CMDB, and the combination of newer monitoring tools that we have. Based on that, at the end of the day, here's the problem, right? If something goes down, as you pointed out early, if something goes down, particularly because everybody is a digital enterprise now, if a service goes down, your business is down, right? Unlike the old days, the IT used to just support certain things like spreadsheets, emails, whatnot. Now the business itself was on cloud, on entirely digital. So if it goes down, not only I should be able to know first before my customers find out, but I should be able to tell my DevOps guys what exactly had happened. You made a config change, you made a code change, you need whatever change. It's, change that accounts, as I wrote in one of my previous blogs. Gene calls it in his book, The DevOps Guru. 80% of things that break down is because of change. So if you're able to control your change and monitor and make it work reliably, you have a winning digital organization.
I'm going to take a different view, right? I think CMDB is dead at this moment, right? Look, everything's ephemeral, right? I put a microservice out, it's gone. I put a container, it's out. I can't afford to spend all this time trying to do this. It's impossible manually trying to track these changes and to update the CMDB every single freaking time. You got to be kidding me. It's not going to work, right? It's going to take up most of my people's time trying to manage that. And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, but you don't have to update the CMDB. All I said is that you got to have a service ownership and figure out who changed what when. There has to be some ownership. You don't call it CMDB. I'm not a big fan of CMDB either. But there got to be accountability, man. You're breaking it. Who's breaking it? How do you fix it?
So my ITOM, who's responsible for the ITOM then? Is it going to be my team that's doing the operations management? Is it your side? Like, what happens in that kind of scenario?
Well, so one of the things that's happening is, again, it depends. I've seen all over the place in multiple organizations. The DevOps guys themselves take accountability and monitor their services. So there, in those cases, ITOM is kind of owned by the service monitoring is kind of owned by the DevOps itself. But there are a lot of big organizations still use a more of a centralized architecture. They have a centralized NOC, centralized SOX, centralized monitoring. Everything is centralized. When it comes down to it, then you should be in a situation to them to monitor. I mean, even take the case of service ticketing, right? Or incident management. Incident management is a huge thing. I'm writing a report on that recently, right? I mean, people don't realize that if something were to go down, not just chasing down what went down, how to fix it is a small portion of it. You need to let your customers know, let your executives know, let people know. You got to have a status page. You need to communicate. You know what I'm saying?
We're in the mid-market, right? I don't have all those resources. I don't have that capability to kind of track all those people, right? Every time I've got an incident, I got to put a request in, right? My containers and my microservices are being created on the fly everywhere. I mean, so every time I got to go document that, I mean, I don't have these tools that are in place to actually automatically collect this stuff. So,
well, I'm not asking you to document. What you have to do is that, again, accountability and then update is very critical. I'll give you an example. You run a microservice, your SMB shop, fine. Your service goes down. If you keep your customers in the dark and they can't find out what's going on with your system, they don't know when it's going to come back up, what do you think is going to happen? There are other good services that are providing a much better service than you. It's only a matter of time. You're one incident away from going bankrupt, I'm telling you, if you don't do it properly.
So you guys are talking a lot about going bankrupt and resources and not having enough, right? Doing more with less. Talk to me about the cost implications. What are you dealing with from a cost standpoint from both sides?
Yeah, my challenge is I can't find enough developers. I am completely constrained, trying to find additional resources. I've got a team that's like all over, like at least 5 different time zones. And, you know, when we're trying to get stuff done, I mean, we're trying to find the most efficient way to collaborate virtually in many of these instances. And, you know, I think cost structure is like, I got to keep adding folks. And I don't want to add folks that are focusing on testing, that are focusing on, you know, the ITSM aspects. I want to get my folks focused on actually getting code out more quickly. I want to get more tools that I can to have to actually get to better automation. And I want to get, you know, if I have to do anything on the monitoring side, I'm trying to automate as much of this as possible. I don't have a lot of room in my budget today to actually add anything else but coders.
So the problems we are facing, both from a cost perspective as well as from a resource perspective, most of the older resources, when I say older, the ones that come in the hybrid environment or DevOps experience, they're not that good with the cloud ops. They don't know how to use some of the monitoring tools, and the other issue is also, if you are to use some of those tools that exist today, I don't want to name vendors, but if you start using them, they are quite prohibitively expensive if I were to monitor entire application that I'm putting in on stack. So I got to start exploring things like either cheaper resources or maybe doing some sort of a combination of open source and whatnot. But one point Ray made that I want to go back and address that, the automation is key. You know, whether it's DevOps or monitoring or ITSM, call what you want. But in a digital enterprise, actually, we have a panel on our CCE event as well on autonomous enterprise. The less you have to manually do things, the more successful you'll be. So autonomous, whether it's DevOps, ITSM, or Cloud Ops, or SRE, or a combination thereof, incident management, everything, automate where possible. Automate like crazy. So it'll not require manual labor resources.
Yeah, I mean, add to that. I mean, our challenge is finding the hybrid cloud engineers, finding the folks that understand the cloud development cycles. We've got to manage some on-premises. We're mostly in the cloud, but the challenge is really there's still just that little bit that's sitting at the edges. Integration is a complete nightmare all the time. So our ability to manage that, microservices in terms of how we manage that in our containers. I mean, and then in many cases, we're multi-cloud, right? We've got to figure out how to actually manage the different cloud instances as we start moving stuff along the way. So, I mean, everything is a barrier to our ability to get stuff out there more quickly. And yet, you know, we're still here, right? I mean, we haven't had an incident yet, Addy. Come on. So,
again, you haven't had an incident yet. That's why you're still in business. You're one incident away.
So, you know, I'm trying to get you guys on the same page, and it feels like you guys are pulling me in 2 different directions. Can you tell me what you wish the other side knew, or what do you need to be successful from your counterpart? Help your counterpart help you.
I'll concede, Andy. You can go first.
Well, there are a couple of things that could help. One is, it's talk about finding resources that are hard for full stack developers. If development guys, DevOps guys are finding it hard to find resources, imagine the support ITSM SRE teams finding the same development resources that we are fighting for. And the problem is we become the cobbler's children, which means we don't get funding and we are given old tools. So we got to manage with the money what we got. So where they can help would be that if they can help, and by the way, Google has mastered this, they spend less than 50% of the time in fixing what I call it as a toil. Read my report, you'll know what it is, or Google it. Google it.
Google.
And Google about Google, yeah. Pretty much, again, like I said, infrastructure as code is a big thing. So automate the whole thing from end to end. So spend less time and toil and spend more time. Where if they have a good development resources by DevOps lending a hand, which will make their code reliable. So that's one area they could help. And the second area, which is a major issue now, is identifying the service ownership. Because we could figure out which service is failing. But if we have like 40 microservices that, we use them to build a composite service, figuring out, which service owner, who's the service owner for a specific service when something goes wrong to figure it out. Some organizations do it well, but if those are the two areas we're struggling the most. And of course, the tooling set, we're not cobbler's children anymore. We are integral part of making our organization run. We need the right tools.
I think on our end, it's a little bit different. We don't have that framework that you typically have. In DevOps, it's been crazy, right? We just get stuff done, and it's been different in every organization. And so over time, we've standardized as much as we could. We've tried to figure out where do we automate on processes as possible, but wherever we can get streamlined tasks in place, wherever we can figure out how to get faster code out the door, wherever we can automate any type of instrumentation, I think that would help, because everything that we get from the ITSM team is manual, right? It's like, hey, can you solve this problem? And it's a break in our process, and it slows us down. And so if we can get that instrumentation in the code earlier enough so that they can get the monitoring, and then we don't have to worry about it, right? The challenge right now is everything is so manual, it's so patchwork that whenever we interface, trying to make sure that things are in place, that's where we start to break.
Yeah, one of the things, let me talk about the instrumentation because you brought it up. That's a very good point. Most of the newer model of working, what I've seen as a best practice that's happening with the digitally savvy enterprises is you don't wait for the application microservice to drop and then later on you try to go back and instrument. What they're trying to do is that you try to bake in the instrumentation from the get-go for whatever the tools you need, whether it's traceability, logging, metrics monitoring, doesn't matter what it is, right? You bake in from the get-go. It doesn't matter whether it's an open source tool or commercially available tool, but you make it as a standard from the ITSM side or from the SRE side, and then you tell them what tools you need to start using it. So by the time when we get into start monitoring, we are able to use the same tools that you guys are developing on, so there's no friction between the teams, which I've seen a lot of good hygiene practice in digitally savvy enterprises.
I think a lot of the things happen when we intersect with some of the ITSM practices, right? I mean, the manual creation of a ticket, the manual creation of an incident, right? There are places where we got to get that automation in place, and we're missing a lot of those, right? And so that's why, when it feels really rigid when we interface on the ITSM side. So I think help where we can actually figure out some of the key practices where we actually have manual interfaces. That's going to be an area where we have to start and figuring out where we can automate things that are highly repetitive, similar types of the way we actually pull a ticket. I mean, some of that just be one touch, one button, ready to go.
Yeah, I agree. That one button fixable, wow, that would be godsend. So one of the things I've also seen with a lot of digitally savvy enterprises, a good practice, what they do is, if an incident happens, for example, if a container or if a server runs out of memory or CPU space, Don't wait for to escalate and create a ticket out of that issue. You know what the issue is, what you have done to solve in the past. So it's even more than a one button click. You know what the problem is. You know how to solve it. Why are you waiting for somebody to manually come in and solve it? Automatically automate the whole process. Solve it. The best way of solve incident management would be that if an event happens, AI or ML or something else solves the issue and then send me a notification saying that, by the way, when you're sleeping, we solved that issue for you. I would love that. I would pay any money for that.
The intersection of the SDLC. Oh, sorry, Joy. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ray.
I was going to say the intersection of the SDLC and where ITSM come into play. I mean, that's the part where we need better mapping. We're missing on that mapping piece so that we can get to a point where we know where the handoffs are. A lot of times it's kind of like, the coder on the one end calls in and says, hey, we've got a problem. We file the incident. We hope it gets resolved. It comes back to us. We're now stuck in, communication hell, workflow hell, collaboration hell, right? And I think a lot of that is also just the way we operate. I mean, the way we communicate, there's some soft skills as well that actually need some work.
And to that point, I want to add to it, SRE was exactly created to solve the problem, bringing the software engineering practices to solve these issues. Read my report.
Absolutely. And what's also important is what you achieve, right? You work for the same organization. Whether or not you wear a DevOps hat or you wear ITSM hat, you work for the same organization. And ultimately, you're accountable to higher ups. So how do you measure yourselves and how do you make sure you're successful as an organization in totality?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, I would say, and just to be conciliatory here, is that we're measured on release velocity, right? How quickly we get releases out the door. We haven't measured on like how bad the releases are or what the quality of releases are, because that's kind of hard to tell given how fast we're moving. There are probably some things that we could do in terms of quality, in terms of like bugs, fixes, that kind of stuff, that we can actually have those measurements correlate back in terms of reducing that and trying to figure out what's the right balance between release cycles and the quality of code. We're missing some of that inside the company, probably because we've always been kind of organic about how we've done things, and we just haven't had a chance to sit back and look at that. I don't know, Andy, what could we do better on our end?
Yeah, so I wrote a blog in this too. When it comes to digital operations, hope is not a strategy. So you need to plan, strategize. For example, particularly when it comes down to reliability, there are companies randomly, I see that all the time, randomly offer 4.9 uptime. And when I look at some of their services, integral services on how they are monitoring, how they are, figuring the whole thing out, you can't guarantee more than 2 nines, but they are going and signing an SLA with the companies with penalties built in the contract, saying that, I'll give you 4 nines. What if it doesn't work? Again, going back to my original statement, if you're not doing things properly, you're one incident away from a disaster. So you need to avoid that. You need to plan first and act the plan. That's the way it is.
Hope is not a strategy. I love that. Well, as we bring this to a close, what I'm hearing from you today is agility is so critical in moving development forward, and governance and control is critical to prevent the next outage or the next big thing. And both are so mission critical to the success of any organization. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll say, look, the world of DevOps has changed because of the level of speed that's required. We're facing a lot of challenges because we're in multi-cloud environments. We're also in a scenario where, the tools and the technologies continue to change at a rapid pace. So our ability to match talent and our ability to match our tools and our ability to match the new processes that are in place are over the map, and everybody's trying to figure out what's going on at this moment, right? And so the places where we can standardize on automation, the places where we can standardize on having better information and incidents and analytics, I think is going to help us in the long run. It's just that a lot of us haven't had a chance to take the time to actually map out how that's going to line up, right? The DevOps side of the house and the ITSM side of the house have traditionally been at odds, not because they want to be, they have different roles and responsibilities, but it's very hard for us to often see that we're working on the same team, because sometimes we have different goals, sometimes we have different objectives, and sometimes they compete, for resources and budgets. And it depends on the company company you're in. Some places have more funding in one area or the other, but typically DevOps gets more of the funding, and therefore you have that tension. So I would say that if there's anything we can do to actually, reduce that tension, get to the automation, help with the collaboration, I think we'll actually be able to be a lot more successful together.
So my thoughts would be, in most organizations that I see, DevOps is somewhat mature, very mature in most organizations. They have the whole thing set up in place. But the other part of it, ITSM is kind of an old term from the hybrid days, from the IT days, but more of the SRE, combination of SRE and ITSM and whatever else you call it, make that with DevOps, you produce the code velocity. You figure out a way to make it work. You got to start working on your error budgets, SLAs, whether it's reliable. Look at the whole thing and see where you stand and figure out whether you can sustain the velocity of the code the DevOps guys are producing. If not, then what's the point of producing this? You throw out the code and then fails. So you figure out a way to make this work, whatever the DevOps guys are doing. I mean, I love what DevOps guys are bringing to the table, right? But there's a need and immediacy to fix this thing to work. And if you make both sides of the coin work, you got a digitally resilient organization.
Yeah, and we got to these things around APM and CDMB and some of these other things don't work anymore. And I think, some of the stuff that you've been working on, Andy, around observability and automation and incident management, that's kind of where the future is. I think we need to learn a little bit more about where that is. That takes us to the SRE world. Andy, if you can share with us, some of those things that are coming and some of those future trends, I think that would help us a lot on the DevOps side.
Oh, yeah. I'm dropping between now and actually even before the end of this month, 3 reports on this, on SRE, incident management, reliability, and how do you make this work. It's a challenge with a lot of digital organizations because they're just coming up to speed. It'll mature. DevOps took, 10 years to mature, and we are only about a couple of years into this. People are realizing, oh, my God, we got to do something to fix it. Yeah, they'll get there. And surprisingly, a lot of companies have figured it out. And some of them, I look at it and going in there saying that they said, we never had an incident before. And I look at them, their architecture. I was like, wow, not only you don't have it, you never had it, but you are set up in a way to, deal with it when it happens. And some of them are like, they say the same way, but then I look at them saying that you do realize that you're one incident away from disaster to closing the business down, right? They're like, really? Show me how. So that's the difference.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some automation in terms of identifying our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Sometimes we don't see that. It has taken us a long time to get DevOps to a place where we're comfortable with it. And you know what? We don't want to change it. We're happy with it, right? And I think that's been some of the challenges is really that, we've got this. It took us a long time to get to where we are, and we're like quite happy. And that's why status quo is holding. But I think there's a lot of us to learn to going forward in terms of getting to the SRE environment. And I think, as someone that's representing the DevOps point of view, we're going to see this change over time if we're going to avoid a disaster. We are moving too fast in some cases, but, it's kind of like, hey, nothing's ever happened yet. So I think we're okay.
Can I
at this point, I'll wrap us up. Oh,
one quick quirk. And all this we are talking about is with the code that has already matured, the cloud and application development we are talking about. We are not even talking about the data economy. We're not talking about AI, ML, and how to create models, how to sustain the models, how to govern the models. That's a whole another topic we need to talk at a different time. But for now, we'll close with this.
And we'll close with, there is a lot of learning on both sides, but the key is you need both to be successful. And we're so appreciative to have Constellation Research, Ray and Andy here with us today at Refresh 2021. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Joyce, your host from Freshworks. Thank you.